Hello there. I shall do my best to be brief. I've always been intrigued by those restored videos you see on YouTube, those videos that were once black and white, grainy, shaky footage, but that people have converted using AI and other computer processes into modern-looking, stabilised, colourised footage. I've always wondered how exactly they accomplished it, but I thought it was probably too complex for me to understand and thus to be able to do. But I had the idea the other day of asking ChatGPT. Is it GPT or GTP? It's GPT, isn't it? I had the idea of asking ChatGPT how I would go about recolorising, enhancing and stabilising some black and white footage. And using a film I found in the public domain, I gave these processes a go to see how well I could restore some old footage. It's turned out quite all right. It's not to the same standard as some of those other YouTube channels you see out there, but it's good enough that I wanted to upload it and to explain how I did it, because that's another thing. These channels that do restore videos using artificial intelligence and other complex computer processes tend to be very secretive about the methods they use, understandably so, but I thought if I could do it and achieve something quite good, I could share how I did it and then you could do the same. I didn't pay for any of the software I used, all of it was free, with the exception of the editing software I have on my computer. I did pay for that a few years ago, and that is your only paid prerequisite. You must have some sort of editing software in order to be able to do what I've done. And so I shall do my best to explain briefly what it is that I did do, what ChatGPT told me to do. And though I know ChatGPT can be, well, to be frank, it can lie, it can make things up, and it did lie, it did make a couple of things up. It told me to use bits of software that don't exist and it just fabricated. It told me to use plugins for those bits of software that don't exist. But if you ask it enough questions, you get to the nugget of truth and the process that it's learned of in order to give you those fake bits of information. For example, if it knows about video editing and it knows about stabilisation, it might create a bit of software and say, oh, you should use videostabilizer.exe. But if you ask it enough questions, you get to the truth, you get to the real knowledge. And I did. I asked it probably about 20 questions, all about different bits of software and which plugins would be best and what order I should do these processes in to that black and white footage, and I think it gave me quite a good answer. And so it may not be perfect. There may be people watching this video who know exactly how to restore old footage and who know a much better way of doing it, but I used free software, I did what ChatGPT told me, and I had quite a good result, and I shall show you the result after this little introduction. The first thing I should say is that there were errors in the original footage that I was unable to fix. In the original footage, in this public domain film I used, which was an American propaganda film from 1943, and it is propaganda because it massively contradicts with what we know of the history of the time. It's trying to paint the Japanese relocation in a positive light when that was quite a traumatic, horrible event. Nevertheless, there are errors in the original footage. There are flashes of colour, there are marks upon the film, and there are 2 points, I believe, where the footage skips. You only miss about half a second, but obviously I and the computer processes I used can't fill in that half a second. It can't make up what happened in that time. It can't restore the audio for what happened in that time. And so there are bits that I haven't been able to fix. The flashes and grains and marks and the light, I would be able to fix. There's a piece of software that I believe is called Neat Video or Neat AI Video. I can't remember which, but it's expensive. It's about £70, and I thought, I'm trying to do this for free, so I'm not going to use that. But you could, and I've heard very good things about that, particularly for people trying to restore old black and white footage. So that's an option if you're willing to pay. But on to the processes I used. Not quite step 1, but step 0.5, I would say, is to take your black and white footage and cut it down to just the bit you want. And I know that sounds obvious, but if there's 10 seconds either side, that's 10 seconds extra that your computer's going to have to process. So you might as well cut it down to just the bit you want to enhance and stabilise and colorise. Cut it down and then add a border to it. And by a border, I mean an image, a still image, for 10 seconds or 20 seconds. I did this. I took a pink rectangle. I made it the size of my video, which was 1920 pixels by 1080 pixels. I took a rectangle, made a big pink rectangle, and pink because it's a nice vibrant colour that I would be able to see clearly. And I added this image to the beginning and end of my video for 30 seconds each. The reason I did this is because this was actually my second or third attempt, and in my other attempts of using the software I'm about to go on to tell you about, it has a nasty habit of restoring the video, yes, but taking a few frames from the end and putting them at the beginning, or a few frames from the beginning and putting them at the end. If you add a border either side, all that's going to be shifted about is that border. In my case, it went from being 30 seconds at the beginning, 30 seconds at the end, to 28 seconds at the beginning and 32 seconds at the end. And that did desynchronise the audio, which brings me on to something else I ought to say. Before you go through any of the AI processes or video editing processes, make sure you use your editing software to just extract a nice clean copy of your video's audio, if there is any. A lot of black and white footage might just be silent, of course, but if you have audio and you wish to preserve it, extract it first. Keep it safe to begin with. Just put it in a file somewhere, just so you have a copy in case it gets desynchronized, in case you need a copy of that audio, or in case you want to try and restore that audio. This isn't going to be a video about me telling you how to restore audio, because I don't know, but I did use a free piece of online software called Auphonic, Auphonic, and all this will be in the description anyway. It gives you 2 hours of free usage a month, and I put the video's audio through it, and it did, well, it denoised it a bit. It took away some of the crackle, it took away some of the, I did that because I'm imagining Audacity and the lines, but it took away some of the crackle and the noises and the clicks, and it did rather a good job. It gives you 2 free hours a month. It's quite a good bit of software. If you don't know anything about changing video audio, I would recommend you give it a go. But that's neither here nor there. Step 0.5 is sort out the video, add a border, and extract the audio. Maybe if you want to edit the audio, if you want to try and improve it, do, but you know, you might not want to, and it might not have audio. Step 1 is going to be in the description as a tutorial. I watched a 5-minute YouTube tutorial on how to stabilize footage, and ChatGPT told me to do this first. I did it first. It seemed to work quite well. The tutorial I used was very quick, very insightful, and it's really rather simple to understand. The only thing I would say is that the man in the video uses a piece of software called Virtual Dub. It's a free piece of software and it's very good, but someone else has created Virtual Dub 2. Virtual Dub 2 is decidedly better, so when he tells you to download Virtual Dub, don't. Download Virtual Dub 2, but do everything else just the same. One of the links in his description is broken, so I'm going to put all the links that he gave me. I'll put all those links and the modern updated links and the link to Virtual Dub, I'll put them on my step 1. I've got it all written down here, which is what I'm glancing down to. I'll put that in the description under step 1. In this tutorial, he uses a plugin for Virtual Dub 2. Well, he uses it for Virtual Dub. He uses a plugin called Deshakeify, utterly free, fairly simple to use. He does tell you to choose the setting that when your video stabilizes, it zooms in a little bit. Because obviously if I've got a camera and it's shaking around, and you're a computer trying to stabilize it, you might zoom in to mitigate some of that shake. Because if my camera's going like this, then my footage is going to be wonky. If I'm trying to fix on a bit of that footage, the bit I can fix on is the bit that's always in frame. If my camera's tilting, there's bits around the edges that aren't in frame, so it zooms in slightly. I zoomed in first, I clicked the zoom option as he told me to. I didn't like it, so I went back, did it again, and didn't choose the zoom option. You might like to play around with it, but whatever works best for you and your footage. Depends on how manic your footage is. In the video I chose, there's a lot going on, there's moving vehicles, zoom didn't work. But you decide what's best. Step 2 is to enhance the footage, to upscale it. There's an inbuilt plugin for Virtual Dub 2 that you can use to do this. I didn't, because my video, when I downloaded it, was already 1920 by 1080. And I was content with that, and I didn't want to be handling any bigger file sizes on my computer with my editing software. I was content with what it was, and so I didn't upscale it. But that would be step 2. Upscale it, because most black and white film probably won't be at a nice big modern resolution. You might want to upscale it. You can use Virtual Dub 2 for that, and the inbuilt plugin, remembering, as the man tells you in step 1, in the tutorial in step 1, every time you use Virtual Dub 2, always compress your file at the end, otherwise you'll be downloading a file that's about 50 gigabytes. Once you've watched that 5-minute tutorial, you'll understand what I'm saying, but he tells you compress the video at the end. Always do that if you're using Virtual Dub 2. Your other option is to use FFmpeg or FFmpeg, but I suspect it's MPEG because that's the name of a file extension. That's rather a simple tool. There's tutorials available online. I shan't link any because I didn't watch them and I didn't use it myself, but it's quite simple to use. You can upscale it using that if you would wish to. Step 3 is to denoise your footage. That gets rid of sort of the flicker and the grainy look of black and white films. It doesn't get rid of, as I've said, those flashes and marks on the film that appear, but it does get rid of all the irritating little background bits that are so, I don't know, uncomfortable to look at, all those grainy pixels. Denoising is very easily done using Virtual Dub 2, again, and I'm trying to stick to one bit of software as much as I can because it's quicker for you and less for you to download, and once you know how to use the software, you'd rather use one thing than 100 different things, wouldn't you? There's a denoising plugin built into Virtual Dub 2. I believe it asks you what strength you'd like to use. You can test it yourself, try different strengths and see what works. Perhaps it's best to test the plugin on a 5-second bit of footage. Cut maybe 5 seconds out of your video and just test what denoising looks like. That will be quicker than waiting, 2 or 3 hours for it to do it, to do the whole video, I mean to say. I believe I used a strength of 100 because my video was very grainy. The 4th step is to colorize your footage. This is quite simple. What you'll want to do is take your footage as it is, even if the audio's now desynchronized, even if you've got a big border at the start and the end. Take your footage as it is now that you have stabilized it, now that you've enhanced it, and now that you've denoised it. Take that footage and upload it to YouTube. It doesn't have to be publicly uploaded. You can whitelist it so that just you have the link. But it has to be on YouTube in order to use Deoldify, a tool available for free on Google Colab. Google Colab's quite simple to use, and I should imagine there are tutorials for it online, but you just follow the little steps. You click a few buttons to load in all the settings, you give it your video's address on YouTube, and then you wait. Press the button, it starts off, and it will colorize each frame by frame by frame, and gradually colorize your footage. At the end, it gives you the option to download it, or if your file's a bit bigger and your video's a bit longer, as mine is. Mine was about 9 minutes, which is a bit long for Deoldify. The option to download might not come up, but you can just click the little file window on the left, click Deoldify, click video, and your video will be in there on Google Colab. I know you might think this is a lot of information all at once, but once you look at Google Colab, you'll see it. It'll be quite straightforward. Google Colab can time out after 30 minutes of inactivity, so at the end when you're trying to download your video and it's trying to sort of zip it and compress it and put it all together, it might time out and you might think, damn, how am I going to get this video downloaded if it keeps timing out? Don't worry. If it compresses your video 60% of the way and then times out, when you reconnect, it will just carry on where it left off and you will be able to download it. It took me 2 or 3 times to reconnect to Google Colab, but it worked. I could download it. A-OK. By now your footage has been stabilised, enhanced, denoised and colorised. Oh, I should say, excuse me, on Google Colab you have a setting to choose. You choose the RF, the render factor. This is basically to what intensity do you want to colorise your footage. Now I tried 20 and I tried 15. 15 was slightly too washed out. 20 was slightly too strong. Because I didn't want to do it all again, I just went with the 15 one, but I would probably go with 17. That would be my advice. Choose a render factor of 17. So now your video's stabilised, denoised, enhanced and colorised. That wasn't quite the right order, but it's done all of those things. Now you've downloaded it, you're back on your computer, you're not using an online tool anymore. What next you want to do, I've got my bit of paper, is to interpolate it. There is a free piece of software called Flow Frames that you can download and it will interpolate your footage for you. Mine was at a frame rate of 25 frames per second and I interpolated it to be at 100 frames per second. Flow Frames uses AI to look at one frame, to look at the next, sort of work out what should be between them. It makes your footage smoother and absolutely lovely to look at. I would strongly recommend using Flow Frames. I had wonderful results with it. It was brilliantly easy to use. I don't need to tell you how to use it because you just put the footage in, click ×2 or ×4 and wait. It takes 4 or 5 hours to do a 10-minute video, but it is exquisite. It's a wonderful piece of software. And I know I'm going rather quick, but again, this shall all be in the description below. The 6th step is to go back into Virtual Dub 2 once more and to use the inbuilt sharpening plugin. Sharpening just makes details clearer. If details in the background are a little bit blurry, it just makes them a little bit easy to see, heightens them a little bit. You do notice the difference if you look at unsharpened footage and sharpened footage. Again, you have a strength to choose from here. I believe it goes up from sort of 0 to 64, is it? I chose a strength of 32, but again, if you take 5 seconds of your footage, in 10 minutes time, you can have loads of different videos lined up. You can say, okay, well, I've done a strength of 16, a strength of 20, a strength of 24, a strength of 28, a strength of 32. Whereas, if you're going to try your whole video, your whole 10 minutes, it's going to take many, many hours to produce all your different experiments, as it were. So, to recap, by now we have stabilised our footage, enhanced our footage, denoised our footage, colorised our footage, interpolated our footage, and sharpened our footage. That is all the processes, or those are all the processes, I ought to say, to be grammatically correct. But the sort of 6.5 step is to take your finished footage, put it back into your editing software, and now you can sort it out. You can cut away those 30 seconds, or 28 in my case, from the beginning, and cut away those 32 or 30 seconds from the end. Get your footage back to just what you want. If the audio has been messed up, you can mute the audio, add back in your original audio, or indeed add back in your AI enhanced and edited audio using Orphonic, or perhaps you know a better program to use. Then you can save it. Obviously you want to save it as high quality as you can with the right resolution, and I don't know if your video editing software is a bit tricksy like mine. Make sure you choose your new frame rate. If it's 60, choose 60. As I said to you, I went up to 100 just because it was multiplied by 4. 25 is an odd frame rate to work with from the beginning, so I just multiplied by 4 because I thought 50 wouldn't be enough. But that's everything. That should be everything now. You can save it, download it to your computer, and now you have this, well, wonderful looking footage. You might need to experiment with a few of the settings. You might want to zoom in on de-shakeify in the first step, as I said, or you might want a stronger sharpness than 32, which is what I used, or you might want a different render factor depending on the quality of your video. I believe a lower render factor for colorizing your video, a lower render factor works best for lower quality, higher one for, well, lovely modern black and white footage that you might recall to be all artsy and now you want to add colour back to. But in short, those are the processes. I hope this has helped, and I'm sorry to have spoken so quickly and to have gone over these processes in not much detail, but I shall neatly mark everything out in the description section. I just wanted to say it all to give you an overview, and if it sounds challenging and it sounds I couldn't possibly do all of that, that's what I thought before I asked ChatGPT how to do it. It sounds very complex, it sounds very complicated, and as though you couldn't possibly do it all, but these tools are free. And once you watch that original tutorial, Virtual Dub 2 is a breeze to use. It's really rather straightforward. All you're doing is adding a few plugins and changing the strength of them and compressing your video and downloading it. Make sure you compress your video. You don't want to be downloading 50 gigabytes. You don't want to be using up, 5% of your hard drive just with that. But yes, I think that's everything. And so now that I've explained myself and I've told you of all these processes, I shall present to you the video that I can't say that I enhanced it, it was the computer processes and the AI processes, but it's the footage that I've worked on, and I hope you enjoy watching it, though do bear in mind it's not a nice subject. The reason I chose this propaganda film is because when I googled public domain footage, it was the very first one that came up. That is the only reason I've chosen this footage. But it's an interesting film, if that. It's not perfect, as I've said. Other creators on YouTube have done a much better job. But if you want to do a bit of a bodge job at restoring some footage, this is a good way to start, I think, and you can play around with the settings and perhaps achieve a better result than I have. The footage I'm about to show you begins with a bit of text explaining the background behind the film and the context behind its making, but that only lasts a minute or so, and you can skip that if you should wish to. But, as I say, I think that's everything. I hope you enjoy, or perhaps not enjoy, but take an interest in the footage I'm about to show you. Thank you very much for watching. Till the next time, goodbye.
When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, our west coast became a potential combat zone. Living in that zone were more than 100,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, 2/3 of them American citizens, 1/3 aliens. We knew that some among them were potentially dangerous, but no one knew what would happen among this concentrated population if Japanese forces should try to invade our shores. Military authorities therefore determined that all of them, citizens and aliens alike, would have to move. This picture tells how the mass migration was accomplished. Neither the Army nor the War Relocation Authority relished the idea of taking men, women, and children from their homes, their shops, and their farms. So the military and civilian agencies alike determined to do the job as a democracy should, with real consideration for the people involved. First attention was given to the problems of sabotage and espionage. Now, here at San Francisco, for example, convoys were being made up within sight of possible Axis agents. There were more Japanese in Los Angeles than in any other area. At nearby San Pedro, houses and hotels occupied almost exclusively by Japanese were within a stone's throw of a naval air base, shipyards, oil wells. Japanese fishermen had every opportunity to watch the movement of our ships. Japanese farmers were living close to vital aircraft plants. So as a first step, all Japanese were required to move from critical areas such as these. But of course, this limited evacuation was a solution to only part of the problem. The larger problem, the uncertainty of what would happen among these people in case of a Japanese invasion, still remained. That is why the commanding general of the Western Defense Command determined that all Japanese within the coastal area should move inland. Immediately, the Army began mapping evacuation areas and for a time encouraged the Japanese to leave voluntarily. The trouble for the voluntary evacuees soon threatened in their new locations. So the program was quickly put on a planned and protected basis. Thereafter, the American citizen Japanese and Japanese aliens made plans in accordance with orders. Notices were posted. All persons of Japanese descent were required to register. They gathered in their own churches and schools, and the Japanese themselves cheerfully handled the enormous paperwork involved in the migration. Civilian physicians made preliminary medical examinations. Government agencies helped in 100 ways. They helped the evacuees find tenants for their farms. They helped businessmen lease, sell, or store their property. Now, this aid was financed by the government, but quick disposal of property often involved financial sacrifice for the evacuees. Now the actual migration got underway. The Army provided fleets of vans to transport household belongings and buses to move the people to assembly centers. The evacuees cooperated wholeheartedly. The many loyal among them felt that this was a sacrifice they could make in behalf of America's war effort. In small towns as well as large, up and down the coast, the moving continued. Behind them, they left shops and homes they had occupied for many years. Their fishing fleets were impounded and left under guard. Now they were taken to racetracks and fairgrounds where the Army almost overnight had built assembly centers. They lived here until new pioneer communities could be completed on federally owned lands in the interior. Santa Anita Racetrack, for example, suddenly became a community of about 17,000 persons. The Army provided housing and plenty of healthful, nourishing food for all. The residents of the new community set about developing a way of life as nearly normal as possible. They held church services, Protestant, Catholic, and Buddhist. They issued their own newspaper, organized nursery schools, and some made camouflage nets for the United States Army. Meanwhile, in Arizona, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, and elsewhere, quarters were being built where they would have an opportunity to work and more space in which to live. When word came that these new homes were ready, the final movement began. At each relocation center, evacuees were met by an advance contingent of Japanese who had arrived some days earlier and who now acted as guides. Naturally, the newcomers looked about with some curiosity. They were in a new area, on land that was raw, untamed, but full of opportunity. Here they would build schools, educate their children, reclaim the desert. Their own physicians took precautions to guard against epidemics. They opened advanced Americanization classes for college students, who in turn would instruct other groups. They made a rough beginning at self-government, for while the Army would guard the outer limits of each area, community life and security within were largely up to the Japanese themselves. They immediately saw the need for developing civic leaders. At weekly community meetings, citations were given to the block leaders who had worked most diligently. Special emphasis was put on the health and care of these American children of Japanese descent. Their parents, most of whom are American citizens, and their grandparents, who are aliens, immediately wanted to go to work. At Manzanar, they built a lath house and began rooting guayuli cuttings. The plants, when mature, will add to our rubber supply. At Parker, they undertook the irrigation of fertile desert lands. Meanwhile, in areas away from the coast and under appropriate safeguards, many were permitted to enter private employment, particularly to work in sugar beet fields where labor was badly needed. Now, this brief picture is actually the prologue to a story that is yet to be told. The full story will begin to unfold when the raw lands of the desert turn green, when all adult hands are at productive work on public lands or in private employment. It will be fully told only when circumstances permit the loyal American citizens once again to enjoy the freedom we in this country cherish, and when the disloyal, we hope, have left this country for good. In the meantime, we are setting a standard for the rest of the world in the treatment of people who may have loyalties to an enemy nation. We are protecting ourselves without violating the principles of Christian decency. And we won't change this fundamental decency no matter what our enemies do. But of course, we hope most earnestly that our example will influence the Axis powers in their treatment of Americans who fall into their hands.